We were also pleased to realize when we came back to our own home that we are surrounded by many of the same gardens as and types of flowers that Monet has.
Yeah, it's quite amazing to walk through our gardens too. They're not as extensive as Monet's, but they have a lot of variety and a lot of depth in what is going on in our garden. So we're doubly interested in what's happening. And I'm also doing a lot of these studies of the flowers in our garden. And the more I spend time with flowers, the more I enjoy it, because they're so beautiful.
We were very fortunate to be able to purchase this property over 20 years ago, and the woman who lived here before us for years had done nothing but plant flowering bushes and perennials, and we're surrounded by I must have 15 different types of rhododendrons that bloom in the spring, particularly in May. Azaleas, fragrant azaleas. We have irises and lilies and all sorts of things. And then, and we have the willows. It just seems like everywhere we turn is something similar to what Monet had. And then at our studio in town, right next door to the studio, is a beautiful pond that is actually owned by the city now, and it's partially owned by the city because of work we did for many years to preserve an urban forest, and in that process a number of greenways levies got voted on, and so this pond was purchased, and there's actually a path around the pond, and there's lilies, and it's just so similar. That's very similar. And I just want to say too, for me, having lived in Japan, it was exciting to see the Japanese influences, because that's what those water gardens are all about, and the little the wisteria growing around the Japanese footbridge, and just how he was so influenced during the time. And think about the late 1800s. The world was actually getting smaller. People were traveling and learning about art and culture from different places, and Japanese art became very popular, and I think was a big influence on Monet. So Dean, as long as I've known you, you've been a fan of Monet, and then only recently we've just been talking about how that came to be. What was it about Monet that inspired you so much?
It sparked my interest, so to speak. Well, I grew up in a conservative religious environment, and my parents were very involved with the church, and they didn't get into the art world that much. My father was into music, but not into art. And so I started exploring things as I got into my later years of high school, and looked and found there was a group of artists, Monet being one of them, that challenged the classical art world on what was good art. And the establishment wouldn't take on representing the more modern impressionist artists until they finally reneged and did let those artists exhibit.
So he really broke barriers. He broke cultural and artistic traditional
he
standards.
Definitely pushed the river,
Pushed the envelope. Well, it started a whole new genre.
And that inspired me. It gave me a perspective that I could explore new areas of thinking and new ways of thinking. And I could study art differently. I can study music differently. And so I did. I enveloped myself in the modern approach, and that's how our music evolves.
I think there's so many parallels between you and Monet as far as breaking boundaries and coming up with new forms of art and expression and music. Because when we started our peaceful relaxation music in 1979, there was nothing like it, at least that we were aware of. There were a few musicians around the country who had kind of also exploring this kind of music. We had heard Paul Horan play flute in the Taj Mahal. We loved that, and that inspired us a lot. So you did already have that kind of energy going. But when we had been doing video through the 70s, and then by 79 we had all these videos with no place to play them because the technology hadn't caught up with the distribution. And so when you went out in the desert and...
Yeah. We also were concerned about the environment and what decisions were being made by the moneyed people. And we wanted to help the population, the human race, to get a handle on what it was to live here. It wasn't just gobble up the whole earth and spit it out. There was an earth here that was beautiful and wonderful and available.
No, it's the source of our physical livelihood and of so much of our spiritual livelihood, too.